everyone, and welcome to the Space and Defense Update. It's Tuesday, August 4th here in New York City, another beautiful summer.
At the New York Stock Exchange.
We are live from the New York Stock Exchange. Contrary to what our outfits might suggest, it has not been a slow summer.
No, not a slow summer.
Sans blazers for the first time.
Yeah. Enjoy August a little bit.
Enjoy August a little bit. It's very nice. But no, we've been blown away, I think, by the funding rounds that have been announced in the last few weeks. It's been a really, really crazy start to, this kind of midsummer. It's been pretty wild to see the scale and size of the funding rounds that have been announced just in the past few weeks. Yesterday was a particularly big day. Valor Atomics, which is developing next-gen nuclear reactors, raised $1 billion at a reported around $6 billion valuation. Base Power, which is based out of Austin, Texas, distributed energy and home battery company, raised $1 billion at a $13 billion valuation. That's less than a year since its last $1 billion round. And
notably, both those companies are only three years old.
2023.
Both founded 2023. Valor, $6 billion valuation. Base, $13 billion valuation. Power is the big theme here.
Yeah, for sure. And then K2, and we're going to have Karan, the founder, on later today. He's they're building large-scale satellite platforms. They raised $500 million at a $6.8 billion valuation. They were just founded in 2022, so just 4 years ago. Antares, developer of nuclear microreactors, raised $470 million, undisclosed valuation. That was 2023 when that company was founded.
Oh, that's another three-year-old company.
Another three-year-old company. That's now, I'm sure in the multiple billions of valuation. Commonwealth Fusion Systems, commercial fusion energy company. So they raised $1 billion. Again, undisclosed valuation. Was founded in 2018. That's based out of north of Massachusetts, or around Massachusetts, I should say. And then Mariana Minerals, a vertically integrated minerals business, raised $310 million at $1.5 billion valuation. I think all of those were announced in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's crazy. We have K2 Space and Karan coming on to discuss his. And there is no summer slowdown in Europe either. It's summer 2026, no July and August off in Europe. So we had Helsing European Neoprime raised $1.8 billion at an $18 billion valuation. Quantum Systems, European manufacturer of drones and autonomous systems, raised $1.2 billion at an $8 billion valuation. Neura Robotics, German developer of humanoid robots, raised $1.4 billion at a $7 billion valuation. And finally, Olix, British AI semiconductor startup, raised $312 million at a $3.3 billion valuation. Cool to see our friends in the UK getting in on the AI semiconductor infrastructure craze. Mo, any thoughts on all this trends, takeaways? So
honestly, when we were going through and collecting all these companies yesterday, it actually made me, a lot of these rounds were billion, the capital raised, right, $1 billion. And it made me wonder, okay, when was the term unicorn coined? How long ago was that? All right, take a guess.
Oh man, I'll say 20 years ago.
No, not quite. It was 2013.
2013, okay.
2013 when the phrase unicorn was first coined. And at the time, do you know how many billion-dollar private companies there were?
How many unicorns exist in the world? I don't know, maybe call it 10, 15.
Yeah, so there was about 39 companies back then that were over basically billion-dollar plus valuations privately held. That was 0.07% of the total number of VC-backed companies, right? Today, that number is north of 1,200. So it is, and we're talking about valuation there, right? We're not even talking about the capital raise. So I do find it just very interesting that, you have all of these deep tech businesses, companies that are very much hardware-centric, building physical infrastructure, raising these substantial rounds. And then today, I don't know if you saw the news, but Airtable is getting acquired by Bending Spoons.
Saw that.
So that was a $1.3 billion valuation that the acquisition is happening, enterprise value. But why I think that's interesting is last private round for Airtable was $11 billion. So
Yeah.
obviously, very, very big.
I wonder what
difference in-
software stocks are doing on that news, because that's
Well,
a pretty significant.
Yeah, so this is sort of the general trend of where I think
Yeah.
a lot of these software, it's like much more difficult to build a moat around software businesses, and you're seeing that with just the Airtable acquisition, and Bending Spoons has been on a complete tear, just acquiring these I shouldn't say undervalued, but substantially less valued software companies than their recent private rounds. And you compare that to just like what we just talked about, which is such a substantial amount of funding that's occurring within sort of physical infrastructure. And I think, to me, there's like 4 related capital cycles that are happening both kind of simultaneously here. Power, the reindustrialization of defense, large space systems, and then kind of physical AI and compute. And to me, I think the most striking thing here is that it's not just that these companies have raised these like very large funding rounds. It's that investors are underwriting the manufacturing ramp of these companies like before the markets are fully mature.
Yes.
Right. And which to me is like very, very much a clear indication that everyone's willing to bet on the bottlenecks. Basically, it's like effectively a shared bet that the bottlenecks over the next 10 years isn't going to be in software. It's going to be in the ability to produce power via power plants, batteries, satellites, drones, robots, and chips at effectively industrial scale.
Yeah. Yeah. What's interesting to me, the common denominator with those buckets that you put forth, talk about reindustrialization, power, AI infrastructure, and large satellite systems, the common denominator with almost all of those is power. Mm-hmm. If we're K2, we'll have Karan on. That is a large satellite that needs these massive solar arrays, and what they can do with the power is, the world is their oyster, but that platform is a function of power. AI, compute, function of power. Obviously, we saw Base and Valor. One is generating power, the other is storing and redistributing it. But that does seem like the underlying trend through all of this. And what's I would say encouraging, I mean, we talk about these valuations, you just listed them off, are very high, but it looks a lot different from the dot-com bubble or dot-com valuations because energy and power is on a 200, 300 year super cycle. Last 200 years, if you look at, I was looking at the NPR had a graph on this, I think it was a little bit stale, but if you look at the energy consumption over the last 200 years, it's just up and the right.
Yep.
And now we're looking at almost a super cycle within that larger 200-year super cycle, where AI needs a lot of power and physical infrastructure, and humanoid robots will need a lot of power. But that is encouraging that we are building in a kind of realm or a sector that has a lot of tailwinds, and you're building the infrastructure for it. It's not just a craze that could be passing.
Yeah. With that, I mean, we have our first guest on, ready to go. So Brian Manning, CEO of Xona Space. They back in March raised $170 million. It was Series C, and they're basically building out a satellite navigation network. So let's get Brian on.
Hello. Hi, guys.
Hey, Brian.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to see you guys again.
Good to have you. We have you on audio right now, and we'll figure out the video. But big day yesterday, huge announcement. Want to get into? I got a bunch of texts when that came out. Very cool to see. But first, tell us about Xona. What are you guys building out in the West Coast?
For sure. Yeah. So what we're building is easiest way to think of it is like super GPS with small satellites. So we came more out of the autonomous vehicle world. Our CTO worked at Ford, working on the autonomous vehicles there. And I guess really recognizing that to support the world's transition from a hands-on world to a hands-off world, that we just need a lot better navigation capabilities than what GPS can provide. That GPS is a great system, but it was ultimately architected around a half century ago to guide weapon systems effectively, not designed to really support what we have out there today, things that need centimeter accuracy with incredibly high reliability, enough trust that you can actually take your hands off the wheel and know that it's going to keep it centered in its lane.
Cool, awesome.
By the way, we can see you now. You look great.
Yeah.
Hey, perfect. All right.
I always love the factory backdrop too. You got half the Xona flag, half the American flag
Yep.
too. It's perfect. Okay, the FCC
Perfect.
just authorized you to broadcast your full satellite constellation alongside GPS. This is big news, but tell us what that means. Maybe break it down and why it's so important.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest limited natural resources for any company in space is spectrum, and that you can put all the satellites up you want, but unless you have the access to actually broadcast capability back to the users, they're not very useful. And so this was like I said, challenging, almost contrarian bet that we made when we started the company. And I think what we identified is that one of the biggest challenges with deploying a new service is not necessarily building the infrastructure, it's integrating it with the user equipment. And say, what does it take to integrate in with the billions of GPS devices that are out there? You have to be able to integrate with the hardware that they have on the device already. And that means not just the chipset, but also the antenna. If you have to integrate with the antenna, you have to be in a certain spectrum band. And so we took the approach of saying, let's see if there's ways to actually share the existing GPS spectrum. Now, is there underutilized spectrum here that we can be very clever about how we engineer, design a new signal to fit in there? And it took years of engineering and regulatory work and policy work to demonstrate that there really was underutilized spectrum, and that we were able to design a signal that could operate in those bands, not just at GPS capability, but at 100x GPS capability, and do it in a manner that wouldn't actually cause any sort of interference. And so, the final FCC approval there was a huge win, I think, not just for the engineering, but also for regulatory, and seeing that companies like ours can use engineering to find clever solutions to be able to better utilize the limited natural resources like spectrum that we have.
So, Brian, no other commercial company in the U.S. has been allowed to operate in the GPS band. So, how did you do it?
Yeah,
Or how did you convince the FCC,
this
is what I should say?
I think it started with us being potentially the only ones that were either dumb enough or smart enough to try. And the GPS bands are massively protected, right? I mean, there's $1 trillion worth of the economy that depends on GPS. You have to be incredibly cautious, and that's why most people just kind of stay. I mean, there's been historical issues with companies encroaching on or causing interference that have created just this unholy messes. So we took a very engineering approach, and a lot of our company and the founders came out of the Stanford GPS lab, whose entire mentality is protect, toughen, augment. And so we took a protect first mindset and said, okay, what are the hard limits that we cannot create interference to the GPS? But that doesn't mean there aren't ways that we can engineer a signal that fits in there. So there was a lot of, in the early years here, spectrum engineering and working to design a signal that was very specifically tailored to fit within the underutilized spectrum, and also doing that in coordination with all the receiver partners to make sure that is a signal that could actually be picked up and utilized and integrated directly into billions of user devices without any sort of hardware change. And so it went from that to coordinating with the U.S. to coordinating at international levels. And so it's been a long process, but exciting to see the approval actually showing that, hey, we said it would work, we proved it would work, and now the approval's in our hands.
Yeah, very, very cool. Can you break down the biggest advantages, maybe on a just a high level, biggest advantages to Xona's constellation system versus GPS? I mean, you talked about the 100 times more signal strength, but what does that allow you to do?
Yeah, and by the way, can you also throw in there, how broken or obsolete is our current GPS network?
Sure.
Nice.
Maybe that was a leading question.
Yeah, right. So
I'll let you cook.
GPS at its core is it's a government-owned, government-operated system designed primarily to support military users. And I mean, yes, it supports 7 billion plus civilian users, but that's not really what it was designed for. And if you look at even what I'd call the premium capabilities that GPS has, the M code and the military ones, they're restricted just to the military users. And so civilians kind of get what's left. And the L1CA, the primary code that civilians have access to hasn't really changed for a half century. And so you've got more and more users trying to operate at higher levels of accuracy, at higher levels of resilience, at higher levels of security, and they're stuck with a signal that was designed in the 60s and 70s. So it's almost, imagine taking a brand new iPhone and trying to connect it to a cellular network from the 70s, and that doesn't work because there were no cellular networks in the 70s. But that's kind of the state that GPS is in today. It's generally that far behind. So what our system is really designed to do is you can simplify down into 3 buckets that we've seen customers really care about, which is precision, power, and protection. And so if you use the automotive example, GPS can kind of tell you what road you're on. That most people experience I'm on the on-ramp, or I'm not on the on-ramp, or maybe I'm on the on-ramp. When you go from a hands-on to a hands-off world, you have to go from I kind of know what road I'm on to I really know if I'm in the center of my lane or not. And that means going from several meter accuracy down to several centimeter accuracy. And you can use that example in automotive, but it also translates over into agriculture and planting crops, or drones and making sure that you're flying within your lanes, and all sorts of different applications. Even scooters, like is it on the sidewalk or is it on the road? The power side is pretty straightforward. That if you see again what's happening in Ukraine and Israel, how much GPS jamming is a real danger and a real threat. That one of the biggest, I guess, ways to combat that is to have a signal that's just much harder to jam.
Interesting.
That also enables us to actually operate indoors in some areas, and in a lot of places that GPS can't reach. And with a security layer that protects us from any sort of bad actors, whether it's somebody playing Pokemon Go sending out fake signals, or nation states trying to disrupt wide areas.
Interesting. Okay, so you mentioned a number of different use cases. Half were commercial-esque, and half were government. So how do you see the breakdown, maybe revenue percentage, or business concentration between the government? Obviously, there's got to be tons of defense use cases. Government customer versus commercial customers.
Yeah, as much as defense is an exciting use case for us, and we're proud of the work we do with the government, we're very much commercial first. And I think for dual use tech to really generally be dual use and genuinely be successful, it's got to be commercial first and let the defense follow, as opposed to going the other direction. And so if you look at the market opportunity,
I'm curious. Sorry to interrupt, but I'm just curious.
I think
you typically, yeah, go ahead.
So I think in recent years, even something like Starlink is a very good example. And if you look at Starlink's transition to Star Shield, where current administration, and we're seeing this more and more in government, they don't really want to be the ones footing the entire bill. Yep. And they want to be able to use the efficiency and the capabilities of the commercial markets to get a product that is potentially a little bit more tailored. And if you look at Starlink is wow, this works awesome. I want that. Give me a version of that. I think where we see, and a lot of that's because there's a massive market for Starlink on the commercial side, and so government can get something that they didn't have to foot all the R&D bill. There's a huge amount of synergies they can leverage there. It's very similar with what we're doing. That if you look at the number of users even for GPS, there's some 7 billion GPS commercial users. There's a couple million defense users. Now the price point, the criticality. Is substantially, let's say, higher in the defense world, but we still see a 10x size market opportunity on the commercial side, and can leverage that to provide a capability to government, to defense at realistically a efficiency and a price point for them that is massively below anything they could get by trying to fund it themselves and build their own satellite network themselves.
So from that regard, I am curious, do you see the commercial opportunity as technology business? I mean, for the most part, the vast majority of GPS value creation occurred in consumer internet apps, right? Obviously, companies like Uber, right? Yep. They use GPS.
And it's all free too.
Yeah, right. So how do you see? How do you see maybe give us some examples of the commercial opportunity that you think is the biggest in terms of companies that maybe are just looking for more accurate GPS technology? What does that look like? And maybe talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of the, I think most misunderstood markets, and it's because everyone can use GPS, but nobody really pays for it, at least as a service. And that's, I think, kind of why we've probably flown more under the radar for such a long time. Is we are, it's one of the first questions investors ask too. Is like, this is a how do you compete with free?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the reason I say that it's misunderstood is that the government spends their $1.5 billion a year on GPS. There's growing multi-billion-dollar market for GPS corrections, where companies, especially in agriculture and construction, and seeing it more in automotive, are paying for these kind of augmentation services. But even those aren't really the market. The real market is there's 2 billion GPS devices being sold every single year, and those devices aren't free. Mm-hmm. And so as much as people think of GPS as a free service, it is not a free capability. And that the OEMs of phones and watches and cars and tractors and everything else are buying GPS chipsets, GPS receivers every single year. And there's a very clear and historical willingness to pay for better accuracy, for better capability. A good example is when GPS went from single frequency to dual frequency. The capability increased by 30% maybe. It was something that most consumers probably don't really notice too much. That being said, I guarantee every phone in your pocket's a dual frequency phone now, because even those incremental benefits are incredibly valuable, and the cost realistically of the chipsets and the receivers all went up by 25 to 50%. That it was not an insignificant amount of increase.
Interesting. So that are you implying that the way you're going to monetize this is through the chipset, through the hardware? Maybe if you have this specific hardware that can access the signal, it's going to cost more, or is it going to look more like an annual subscription where you can tap in if needed?
Yeah, so we actually just launched on our website our Pulsar Verified program. So we worked very hard to make sure that we are compatible with every possible chipset out there, and we've demonstrated there's more than a dozen receivers that are actually talking to the satellite that we launched last year, and have demonstrated they can use the service without changing the hardware on board. And so ultimately what our sales model is we sell, you can almost think of it like a magical piece of software that you can put onto a GPS device that makes it work 100 times better than it would else without that. It's like we have to go launch the satellites to make the magic software work, but at that point we are software salespeople. And the superpower of GPS that we also benefit from is it's one directional broadcast. So once you have coverage in an area, you can support an infinite number of users in that area, and that enables us to operate a business. It's effectively a SaaS business. And so we can offer the service to some customers. It's on a per device per year basis. It can be a per device permanent subscription basis, or it can just be an enterprise-wide basis. And so it's all the same models that apply to SaaS companies.
But we hate enterprise SaaS companies now.
Right?
The market hates SaaS companies.
I think we have a little bit different moat than a typical enterprise SaaS company. That, I don't know if you can see the satellite sitting behind me here, but and I think one of the things that's unique about Xona is it's a space-enabled company that also can operate with very unique margin structure because of the that broadcast service capability.
Brian, are you worried about launch?
Ooh, I think anyone that's a space operator these days needs to at least be keeping a very close eye on it. And with SpaceX slowing down the Falcon side of things, I think the supply and demand of launches was relatively balanced when you had the Falcon there and the transporters there. And there's obviously a crunch on it right now. So I'm optimistic that in the 29-30 timeframe that there will be. There's never really been, a healthy competitive market, I don't think, for launch. That there was SpaceX, but there was nobody challenging them realistically. And what we see coming with multiple new providers up and coming, that I do think in say 29-30 plus, we can get to a world where launch is actually commoditized, where there's actually a competitive marketplace, where there's actually multiple providers that are competing on price. In the short term, though, I think it's a lot of companies, including ourselves, are getting more creative to make sure that we can still find the rides into space that we need.
Do you see rideshare continuing because rideshares obviously has built this entire ecosystem, and now we haven't seen kind of new rideshare missions emerge from Falcon 9. But do you think the other providers that you mentioned, I assume you're talking about a New Glenn or a Terranar or Neutron and the likes, would offer? Are you hoping that they offer rideshare?
So I guess two sides of this answer. We're getting to the point where we're not really looking as much into rideshare, and as we start to deploy the constellation, really looking for full rockets.
Oh, interesting.
And I think that puts us in a more unique, protected space, in that we've kind of crossed the hurdle and are at the point.
Yeah.
I will say, like, if you look at where we were 3 years from now, and we saw rideshares all shutting off, I'd be far more terrified.
Yeah.
On just how hard it would be for earlier stage companies to get one or two up. Are other companies going to offer it? Maybe. I think, as you guys have pointed out in some of the research articles before, the economics on the transporter launches, I just don't think we're nearly as lucrative as some of the other opportunities out there. And so I think what you might see happen is, companies that are looking to buy full launches and launch their own constellations offer, a couple slots on it to basically offset the cost of their own launches. There's things that we've looked at on that side as well, that, okay, if we're booking a full launch, can we sell off a couple of them at a little bit different margin to offset the cost of our own launches?
Brian, once you have your constellation up and running, right, and at, let's just say, maturity, like, what is that? Maybe describe to me what that world looks like. What does that enable on the commercial side? I know you probably can't talk that much about the defense side, but at least on the commercial side, tell us about what that looks like.
Yeah, so the idea that what we really open up, and I'll never claim that we're an enabler for an autonomous car to work, because you can go get in a Waymo today and drive around San Francisco. Where we really shine is enabling.
It's very annoying once you call an Uber and you see the Uber driver out in the river, and you're like, "How did you end up there? Like, are you okay?" I joke, but it has happened.
Yeah, I went to a World Cup game the other day, and trying to find the Uber driver in the parking lot afterwards was just a train wreck.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a lot of, I think when people think of precision, they think of it, in the world that they see today, and you think about, the Strava app not wandering all over the place and actually telling you exactly how far you ran, not plus or minus a half mile. And to think about finding the Uber in the parking lot efficiently, and you can connect to the ideas of, like, okay, can we geofence scooters so they're not busting down the sidewalks and just have them shut off? And can I see lane level traffic and things like this, instead of just what is the fastest road, what is the fastest lane? Where we start to really shine is, how do you expand a lot of these capabilities? How do you expand the world of autonomy outside of being a luxury good, and help it start to become really the default form of transportation? And so I'm from way up north, where in Michigan, where roads are covered in snow all the time. Vision systems, LiDAR systems will work to some extent, but you really need something else that tells you where the road is at. And this is where what I get more excited about isn't taking a fun taxi ride through the city. It's, can you actually get the ambulance to go through the snowstorm when a human really couldn't? And translating this again into agriculture, like the water savings, the fertilizer savings, the benefits of precision agriculture are so massive, but those systems are just not affordable enough to actually be implemented into small farms, into developing countries, into places that don't have the technology. And I think once you start to open up things like that, that's not too many people, I guess, really appreciate how massive of a thing GPS is today, much less how much more it could do when you bring it to the next level. And even GPS had the same thing, right? Like, GPS was never built to tell a taxi where it's at, but without it, to your point, Uber doesn't exist, DoorDash doesn't exist, none of these things exist. And we're already seeing that start to pop up with new incoming interest as we're getting ready for launch here also.
I have a silly question. So the AirTag, it's been a great invention. I love it. I have 9 of them. They're awesome. But it's just a blue dot on a building, right? For the most part. Is there a future where you could build a commercial piece of technology that's like the AirTag on steroids, where you're like, oh, I lost my keys, but they're like underneath my couch, like something like that, or is that? Am I being?
yeah.
This is a Bluetooth to space question. If that's part, if that is part of your product set.
I mean, we certainly keep an eye on anything spectrum related. I know that I saw the FCC posted their Wi-Fi and Bluetooth notice recently. I mean, I think we haven't looked at it in too much depth at this point, but any spectrum bands, if they're being underutilized, if you can actually use them in a manner that's not going to interrupt or actually disrupt existing services. And that's the same mentality we used in the spectrum on our side is, can we be smart engineers and utilize an underutilized resource?
Yeah.
And so I guess, Mo, to your question, I mean, I think that's exactly where the company is headed is, we're going from GPS that can give you kind of some accuracy outdoors to what we're building with Pulsar is kind of super GPS, which can give you hyper accuracy in some indoor areas, and already looking forward into what is the next, edition of the company start to look like, which is how do we start to drive that capability everywhere?
Awesome. Well, if you do build those tags, can we get a few free?
Well, yeah, we'll see what we can do. So.
Okay, right. We have it on the record.
You're leading him into making this product.
Of course. Brian, thanks so much for being with us. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Brian. And congrats on all the success.
Thank you, guys.
And
Appreciate
the
the time
recent.
as always.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, the Bluetooth to space is a whole nother. Hubble network is doing this.
Yeah.
So that was another FCC change. The FCC is really opening up spectrum, but that is now Hubble has 7 satellites in orbit, and they used to have to ask for waivers every time they connect a Bluetooth device to space. And now the FCC is proposing to open that up. So another use case in space, which is cool to see.
Absolutely. By the way, I do love the AirTag. It is probably one of the greatest inventions of ever.
So I asked Hubble about this. Why not just use the AirTag?
Yeah.
The AirTag works phenomenally. It connects with every phone.
For what specifically?
Well, Hubble is building their own Bluetooth, basically like an AirTag network.
Right.
And people already have access to AirTags. So why would someone use Hubble to track whatever they want to track versus AirTag? The answer is Apple doesn't have an enterprise use case for it. So if you want to spend $25 on an AirTag, that makes a lot of sense. But if you need to track 1,000 items, you're not going to spend $25 on each one.
Sure.
You might want a maybe cheaper hardware appended to it.
Anyway, big day for the space industry today. SpaceX is reporting earnings tonight. First time they're reporting earnings, and I think interestingly, I don't think earnings is the real story here. I actually think that this is one of the most influential private companies to have ever existed, and we're finally going to get to see what the public markets are expecting of SpaceX, right? So SpaceX, they're going to report earnings, they're going to talk, management commentary, guidance, and it'll be very interesting to see how the market reacts to that. And I went through a lot of the bank kind of previews and the bank reports, and interestingly, almost nobody's actually talking about the actual quarter. I know you've spent some time on this, so what should we be looking for?
Well, I think there's going to be 3 focuses. One, does the broader growth story continue? Doesn't need to blow anybody out the water, just the story continues to make sense. 2, what is CapEx? What is CapEx guidance? I think that's a little bit about what you're getting at. This is a lot of these mega cap companies have gone up or down 10% based on that CapEx guidance. And then I do think guidance on Starship. Are they going to attempt a catch on the next launch that was implied by Elon? I think there'll be a number of questions on that as well. But really just got to keep Starlink growing. Don't want to slow down. Maybe have some kind of AI revenue outside of these data center rental deals that I think will be important to show continued growth. And then where's the spend at?
Yeah, and I mean, I will say the big piece of all this is the first lockup.
Yes.
That's August 6th.
Yeah.
So more shares are going to be eligible for trading than already are trading right now, so are outstanding. So the numbers are 900 million shares, $100 billion of stock are going to be eligible for trading on August 6th, so 2 days from now. Now, to put that into perspective, the current public float is 639 million shares, right? So the share is going to over double. I don't think investors are expecting insiders to all of a sudden start selling. I don't think anyone's like losing faith in the business, but that plus the earnings, I think is a setup for pretty significant volatility over the next like week. So, ultimately, I think it's more of a technical overhang. I don't think it's a fundamental overhang. But, the last couple months, I mean, even for companies in general, like clearly SpaceX, it had its high share price, $200, and it's now come off about 50%. And the space companies, the space ecosystem in general, has definitely traded in lockstep with SpaceX for the most part. Actually, I'd say more than lockstep. Like it's been a much higher beta trade because the publicly traded space ecosystem, in many cases, those companies are down 60 to 70%. So I mean, you'll see like SpaceX is up 3-4%, and you'll see the entire sector lift like 5-10%. So it is interesting to see like it is very much trading. And I've actually had a couple of folks from some of these public companies basically saying like, hey, like what's going on? Like, how should I think about like the value of my shares in these companies, like given the volatility? And I think that, look, the reality is you're going to have to just accept the fact that for the foreseeable future, you're going to be trading in line with like how SpaceX is trading.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Brian this question. I think we'll have time to ask Evan it. But how does the volatility in the public market impact the private sector capital allocation? Right now, we haven't seen it. The private companies we just mentioned, the valuations are still through the roof. But that's going to be an interesting dynamic. Also, I think you have to assume that almost all employees will sell some, or if not a lot, of their shares. This is a very unique IPO. The SpaceX IPO created I think it's 4,400 millionaires.
Yep.
A lot of these folks are not just one millionaire. They have now $20 million of SpaceX shares in their Fidelity account, and every day they're seeing $1 million subtract from the net worth or $1 million increasing from the net worth. So it's very different from an institutional provider when you see $20 million of SpaceX shares and then call it 200,000 of SPY or QQQ. It's only prudent, even if the stock is 50% lower than the highs, to try to reduce that allocation. Obviously, I don't see anybody selling their entire shares, but to reduce it and diversify their portfolio, I think is the natural thing for folks to do.
Yeah, it'll be definitely interesting. I do think there'll be some volatility, but we'll definitely be listening in on that earnings call today, no doubt. Okay, so next up we have Evan Rogers, CEO of True Anomaly. Let's bring him on. Just a few months ago, Evan raised $650 million. Evan, what do you do with all that money? Does it even fit in the bank?
It does, yeah. The American banking system is extraordinary. We're focused on execution. We're entirely focused on delivering the programs that we're on contract to execute: space-based interceptors and a few unannounced Jackal programs, as well as Mosaic. In fact, right now, today, we have a big demonstration to a customer. I'm sitting here in our Long Beach factory where we build something that I can't talk about. But yeah,
we are the customers. This is the demonstration, right? You just got to pan around.
This is it.
Yeah, this is it.
So Evan,
I'm going to fly some satellites on my iPhone.
Evan, let's take a step back. You've had quite the journey. You're building a space defense prime. I hope that's the right categorization. But tell us a bit about the business, what you're building, and then how you got into all this, because you do have a very interesting and very relevant background here.
Well, look, True Anomaly exists because space is an essential part of modern life. Everything from the battlefield to the transactions that you two were just talking about actually are enabled by or execute through the space domain and the technologies that humans have delivered into the space domain. We understand the world better, and we're wholly dependent on this domain that most people don't really think about. And over the last 25 years in particular, the United States has left that domain largely undefended, and now we're playing catch up because our adversaries spent the first part of this century building the weapon systems that are designed to prevent the U.S. from exploiting space. So True Anomaly is focused on building the capabilities that the United States and its allies need to protect and defend itself in the space domain, and we're exclusively focused on that. So we're a very different company than I think the rest of the space ecosystem that may have civil customers or commercial customers. We think space warfare capabilities will be fundamentally different than most of what exists on the market today, and we're going to go build those.
So there's no commercial market that you're focused on today.
That's exactly right. It doesn't mean, by the way, that doesn't mean that we don't use commercial systems, commercial technologies, but the end item has a performance envelope that's designed for warfare. Lockheed Martin doesn't sell F-35s to United Airlines, right? Because the exigencies of the battlefield, that would be, sign me up for that.
Yeah.
Sign me up for a ticket on that
First
one.
class.
Yeah, but so yeah, exactly. The battlefield just requires different systems, and space warfare is evolving quickly, just like every other battlefield, and it means that you need purpose-built systems.
Cool. You had a big win recently, so I want to hear about the Victus Haze mission. This was a spacecraft chase in orbit. So give us a play-by-play, and I want it in movie trailer voiceover format.
Well, it starts with the beach volleyball session, a la Top Gun. Victus Haze is one of the capstone missions of the Tactically Responsive Space Program. That's a program that's being acquired by Space Safari, which is part of the Space Systems Command Organization, the acquisition arm of the Space Force. And it's in response to this pretty monumental change in the way that China and Russia are building and deploying space weapons. We can't always predict where they're going to deploy something, and so we need a reactive capability to get something into orbit quickly, because it's largely cost prohibitive to deploy systems with warfighting capability sort of en masse in every single orbit. Space is huge, it's a massive volume, you sort of like can't cover down on everything. The best analogy actually comes out of the air superiority landscape. Sometimes Russians like to fly big nuclear bombers, not loaded with nuclear weapons, but off the coast of Alaska. And there are air fighter units that are stationed in Alaska and Washington that often interact with these bombers. That's called an intercept. And so the same concept applies to space. We have capabilities on the ground. We need to deploy those capabilities quickly to respond to threats or reconstitute systems that are destroyed in combat or maybe degraded through normal operations. So that's the big picture landscape for TAC-RS. The Victus Haze is one step forward from the previous mission. The previous mission was focused on, hey, can we get a payload onto a rocket and get that rocket to space within 48 hours? That's an unprecedented capability, only really demonstrated by SpaceX thus far. Victus Haze is about that end-to-end mission. How do you test the entire sensing through launch, through prediction, through pursuit architecture that gets a spacecraft capable of conducting rendezvous and proximity operations into contact with another spacecraft that is simulating a threat? So True Anomaly just executed our portion. Rocket Lab was another player in the engagement, and we can go into more detail on that, but it's a really, really exciting mission.
So the round that you just closed a few months ago, the $650 million, it was $2.2 billion valuation. Why is now the right time for that, and what is that going to enable for you guys?
That's really going to enable scale of our existing products. So space-based interceptors, Jackal, plus entry into a couple of new markets that are emerging in space superiority and space domain awareness missions. So we'll scale up Jackal for programs like Tactically Responsive Space, the follow-on programs for Victus Haze, and we're delivering on SBIs. So a lot of that is going into the factory that's behind me. We're growing the team now we started this year with 220 folks. We're growing we thought we were going to go to 400. We beat that. We actually won some new work that required some additional headcount. So I think we'll end this year with about 600, and we're scaling up to 1,000 people next year.
Your Jackal spacecraft, that was the one that was part of this Victus Haze mission. That's going around and kind of monitoring and inspecting maybe adversary or even maybe high-valued U.S. assets. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. That's the space domain awareness portion. So Jack, the two missions that we executed in Victus Haze were one, conducting an intercept with and a reconnaissance mission, or just taking photos of a spacecraft that wasn't attempting to maneuver. So in this case, it was Rocket Lab's Puma spacecraft, which is based on their Pioneer platform. In the second mission that we executed, we had to go against a maneuvering adversary. So Puma conducted a defensive maneuver to try to lose us, to prevent Jackal from seeing the maneuver and then continuing to perform its imaging mission. We were able to capture them pretty quickly and then replan the trajectory and the engagement, and then get back on track and execute the mission. We did that, I think, in 61 or 62 hours,
Cool.
And we're the first company ever to do a tactically responsive space orbital pursuit.
So I know your first two missions had some challenges, and I'm curious, like from those couple missions to where you are today, like what did you learn? How did you jump back so fast and have such a successful mission this time around? Like talk to us a little bit about the iterative process and that development process and just that general learning process amongst those missions.
Yeah, those missions were really designed to give Anomaly the opportunity to learn. You know, when you're building a product and you're building a product in a startup, you have to build the airplane, you know, the proverbial airplane while you're flying it. You have to figure out your assembly, integration, and test processes, your test flow, your documentation practices, how the engineering team works together. And the best way to do that is to build the product and go fly it. So to deliver on Jackal as a product, principally for the tactically responsive space mission, which we just talked about, the Victus Haze program, we knew we would want as many shots on goal to develop both Jackal and Mosaic in flight. So we set up our first mission 14 months after really the founding of the company was the intended mission. The flight got moved by a few months. We got a few, minutes of data on that first spacecraft. Didn't hit the threshold that we were looking for, but we learned a lot, and that was the whole point. And then 9 months later, we were back on orbit, learning again. We got a couple more weeks of data on that spacecraft, and all that learning flowed into the latest mission, which was MX3 originally, and then was combined with the Victus Haze program. So really, the success of this is a reflection of the learning and the iteration. And some of the most important aspects of iterating on capabilities like this, obviously you need access to launch, but you really need a culture of learning and a culture of performance. So you can't sort of just like throw something into space and cross your fingers. You have to really get to the root cause, the cultural root cause, the organizational root cause, the process root cause, and then of course the technical and product failures. So we had the opportunity to learn that over the last couple of years, and the results speak for themselves.
Yeah, it's amazing. You need a culture of iteration of the company, but you also need a culture at the Pentagon and with investors that can see a first mission and second mission that weren't maybe complete, but maybe improved on each other, and say, hey, that's a success. And I think that's a big cultural change that we've seen over the last 5-10 years. Let's say Anduril wanted to get into this category. What's your, and they have a little bit to some extent, what is your key advantage, maybe as a first mover in space domain awareness and interceptors?
Hey, Jack, you're right that Anduril's already in the category. They're one of the performers on the Space-Based Interceptor program and elsewhere as well. Our major advantage is that we design exclusively for the mission. I can't speak to the way that Anduril operates or develops products, but we develop full stack solutions, so hardware and software and the payloads designed for space superiority. We believe that creates a superior product delivered faster at a price point that you can really control, because you don't have a supply chain that's spread necessarily across the industry. So vertical integration is really important. Designing for the mission is really important. And the entire culture and focus of this company is on understanding what the warfighter needs, predicting what the warfighter will need next is on the basis of what China and Russia are building and fielding, and then designing capabilities that only perform the mission. Space warfare, space superiority, reconnaissance, surveillance, and then training missions. So we built the whole company around this idea. And so all of our talent, all of our capital, all of our energy goes into that. And right now is the right time to do it. The Space Force's budget is, almost doubling every single year. Last year with reconciliation, it was 40 billion. Base budget was 30 billion. This year, the base budget is 55. That just went through HAC-D. It went through appropriations. If R2 passes, which is, I think we'll see reconciliation 2 passes. I think it could be unlikely. Then the Space Force's budget's, I think, 71, 72 billion. We think the Space Force's budget needs to be 150 to 200 billion in 2035. Space is the new battlefield, and we're positioning ourselves to be one of, I think, a couple of players in this market, by the way. I don't think this isn't, the customer buying behavior doesn't just sort of create monopolies, it creates monopsonies. And at the end of the day, performance is what matters.
I'm gonna have to. That's going back in my econ class. Might have to Google that one.
I know. I'm afraid to say that word, mispronounce it.
Evan, let's zoom out for a second. So just to kind of stay on this this topic area here. 10 years from now, what do you think space warfare means? What is that? What capabilities do you think will exist? And how much of it starts to evolve into kinetic, offensive capability?
So I think in 10 years, space warfare is normalized as a category, and the customer is talking about deployment of capabilities for offense, defense, reconnaissance, or training, really at scale. That doesn't necessarily imply kinetic systems, of course, but I think what you'll see in the space domain is a lot of what happens in the maritime domain and the air domain, which is this sort of low-grade conflict designed to test your adversary's capacity to test their tactics and test their resilience and capability of deterrence. So I think what you're going to see is a heterogeneous architecture that performs reconnaissance all the way through targeting, all the way through defensive capabilities. I think you'll see the Space Force talking about it, because really one of the only ways that you can really deter your adversary is if they believe that you have the capability to defend yourself. If they think that their offensive capabilities are not going to be effective, they have to know that you've got something right in your pocket. This is why nuclear deterrence works really well, of course. But I think it's a wide variety of weapon systems, kinetic and non-kinetic, multi-domain capabilities on the ground and in space.
The private capital markets are obviously incredibly hot. And you guys had a big raise, but we also see that with the energy sector, other defense tech companies, space companies. How much do you look at the public market volatility? And also, because you are a space company, first and foremost, how much do you look at the SpaceX stock as maybe an indicator of where private markets can go? Is that something that's even on your mind? Or, right now we haven't seen that much volatility in the private capital markets like we have in the public sector. But just as a operator, do you keep an eye on that stuff?
The day-to-day price action really doesn't weigh on how we think about capitalization strategy. We have capital partners that are focused really on the long term, and see, what we've convinced the capital markets of is that we're at the beginning of a space defense super cycle, and there is going to be a company built for space superiority that can sustain a very big business as the Space Force grows and international partners get in. So the day-to-day price action doesn't really weigh on that. I think what we're most impacted by are these major macro inflection points, which are relations between China and the United States, relations between Russia and the United States, overall defense spending. We are interested, in particular about the prospects of Anduril's IPO. I think that's going to say a lot about this experiment of defense tech, whether investors really can get interesting returns. SpaceX definitely weighs on it, but I think their narrative around AI has changed the way that we talk about SpaceX as both a partner and a competitor. Less so. We've very rarely talked about SpaceX as a competitor, but where investors are most interested is really in launch capacity. Is SpaceX going to preserve? And Mo, you've done some speaking on this, and you guys have both done some writing on this. Are they going to provide launch capacity to the broader market?
And what do you think?
I think they will. Look, the SpaceX SpaceX basically built the rails for the modern space market. All of the startups, including Anomaly, that many of whom you've spoken to have been enabled by missions like Transporter. I think the conversation around Falcon 9 is really a reflection of their bullishness on Starship in particular. I think the sort of like outside perspective that Starship has some viability issues is, I think, probably overblown. And so I think SpaceX is really gearing up for scale in the same way that they did Falcon 9. And we believe they'll continue to provide capabilities for companies like TA. Now, one of the advantages that we have is that we don't procure our own launch except for R&D launches. So the government, through the NSSL program, just provides us launch. We provide the payload to the integration facility. We work with a launch provider, but launch is not part of our cost of goods sold. Only when we're doing R&D, and there's launch access sufficient for that.
Yeah, that's interesting because like a lot of the NSSL Phase 3 is basically a requirement for SpaceX, right? They have to provide the launch capability, and that's not changing anytime soon. So that is an interesting advantage. I have a question on sort of the demonstration of capabilities. So like there have been some anti-satellite weapons capability demonstrations by Russia and China, and I'm curious, like from a maybe like a philosophical perspective, or like sort of maybe like from you've spent time on the military strategy side. I'm curious, like, should the U.S. publicly demonstrate offensive capabilities at some point, or should we continue to wait?
No, I think we have to. The United States has done that before. In 2008, we executed a mission called Operation Burnt Frost. We adapted a anti-ballistic missile system called the SM-3 and shot down a U.S. defunct satellite, I think USA 294, if I'm not mistaken. But that was really in response to China doing the same thing a year earlier, in 2007. I don't know about the efficacy of that message. Very different landscape of space capability and reliance from the United States standpoint. Now we're like wholly reliant on space capabilities. So I think it is high time that we make it very clear to Russia and China that if they behave in an irresponsible way in space, they're going to get punished for it, and their attacks are going to be ineffective on U.S. systems.
Evan, we have a couple minutes left, but I had one burning question I had to ask you.
My chair just broke.
Your chair.
Not a good sign
in
for
anticipation for the question. Yeah. Jolly Roger. That is your Twitter name, your X name. How did that nickname come to be? And you clearly are leaning into it.
Yeah, there's a storied tradition in the U.S. military for the use of call signs. So usually you get a call sign because you've done something stupid or epic, and I won't share on this conversation what that was, but I went to the Air Force Weapons School, so the Air Force's Top Gun program in the Air Superiority Track, 328th Weapons Squadron Liberators. And the Air Force has this organization called the U.S. Air Force Weapons School, where you teach advanced tactics and tactical leadership. And I had the great fortune of going through that program along with a few of my colleagues that are here at Anomaly. There is a ceremony in which a call sign is bestowed upon you. It is an incredible moment, and over a beer, I can tell you, but definitely not on the New York Stock Exchange floor.
All right, well,
but it's part of our culture. I think that's the most important thing, right? It's like this is a company that's led by an operator whose operators are deeply embedded in the product and engineering process, and that tells you, I think, a lot about what we're trying to accomplish here.
Yeah, Evan, thanks so much for being on the show. Congrats on all the success so far.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Good to see you.
See you soon.
I need a nickname.
You do. I guess we'll have to think about that one. All right, let's talk. We're about to have Karan Kunjur, CEO of K2, on the show. So I think it's appropriate for us to talk a little bit about Starship, especially the recent news on the heat shield. So maybe talk a little bit about that. Eric Berger put out a piece. There's a lot of talk on X about sort of the efficacy of the heat shield.
Yeah, so this was an interesting debate that came about earlier this week or last week. The title of Eric Berger's article was "Experts Warn Current Starship Heat Shield Tech is a Dead End for Rapid Reuse." And the article wrote, Despite the market progress with the 13th test flight of Starship, one key issue, probably the key issue when it comes to Starship's future, remains unsolved. This concerns Starship's heat shield, the roughly 18,000 ceramic tiles that protect the vehicle's underbelly during its fiery return through Earth's atmosphere. And some experts say SpaceX's current approach may not get Starship to its ultimate goal of flying frequently at low cost. So
Strong
the
words.
the heat shield is and SpaceX has admitted this and says it openly, but the heat shield is the key technological hurdle that SpaceX needs to solve for rapid reuse. And this goes back to a lot of the comparisons with the space shuttle. The space shuttle was reusable, but it was enormously expensive and did not fly that often or as often as a reusable spacecraft rocket should fly, because the heat shield required intense inspection and kind of, tinkering with after every flight. So you have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that to me, the key debate here isn't whether the heat shield works, right? Because obviously, clearly it works. Like, the vehicle survived re-entry.
Yeah.
It's actually in most recent launch, it was the most successful re-entry. And
It's currently in the water, floating, being tugged.
It's being tugged.
Being tugged back to shore.
So I think that, like, right now, I mean, to your point, the question is, can it be can you build a system that can be rapidly reused, right? And I think that's the core piece, because that is substantially relevant to, like, SpaceX's future business. I wonder if there is sort of, like, this would be an interesting analysis to do, which is, like, to see what is the minimum cadence of Starship that SpaceX would require on a worst case scenario to be able to build a fully functioning and fully operational compute satellite constellation, and also continue to build their Starlink constellation. Because I think Elon has, like, he's thrown out numbers as to how many Starship launches he wants every year, which is, like, a huge amount.
Yeah.
Right? Like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, or at some point thousands. So, like, which is, like, obviously, like, at that point, I mean, that future is very exciting, but it's sort of like, okay, well, like, let's just say the worst case scenario. I mean, there's an interesting thread from Chris Combs that you'd highlighted, which is, like, he brings up the point that his point is just like, look, the material science is just not there right now. I mean, NASA took 50 years to get to where the heat shields are today.
Yeah.
And outside of, like, some type of huge innovation in material science over the next few years, and maybe SpaceX gets lucky, that this is a pretty substantial issue in terms of refurbishment times. So, to me, I think, like, it's just I'm not terribly worried about it. I mean, SpaceX has solved more complicated technical problems, but it's definitely something that needs to be kept an eye on.
Yeah. I think the experts would say that the heat shield in its current form is a incremental step from the shuttle, and is not, like, a breakthrough, which I think is a fair comment. But then I think the maybe proponents or supporters of the progress will say that, as you mentioned, Starship has survived maybe all of their re-entries. There's been tiles missing. They survived that. They have the stainless steel architecture, which is highly resistant to high temperatures, and that creates almost two heat shields in a way to prevent the burn through. And also, this is like, the shuttle flew, I don't know, call it 100, whatever it was, dozens of times, hundreds of times. Every flight of the shuttle had people on it. Almost every flight with Starship is not going to have people on it. So It's a very different risk appetite, and you're able to continue to develop the heat shield over hundreds and thousands of missions versus the shuttle, which needed to be perfect every single time. So, I think, and also regarding the point you made about what is the minimum cadence to deploy a, call it, gigawatt data center in space, because Starship is so big, you actually don't need that many flights to get a gigawatt data center, orbital data center in space. It's something like 100 flights, let's say.
Yeah.
So, which is the cadence that Falcon 9 can do, and they certainly will be able to, surpass Falcon 9. Getting to 1,000 probably needs that rapid reuse.
Yeah, I think, to me, the main question is, Is this a fundamental like architectural limitation, or are we just watching like the sort of engineering process play out? I do tend to think it's the latter, and I think it's just a matter of the engineering process. It'll be interesting to see if they address it on the earnings call. I don't think they will, but it'll definitely be interesting.
Yeah. It would probably have to come from an analyst question. But Elon did say that they are going to attempt a second stage catch.
Yes.
Which means they feel very confident in it.
Yep.
And that also means that you and I are making a trip down to Brownsville.
Okay. Yes.
And we're going to do a live show while we see the catch in the background.
Yes, that would be fun.
Yeah. While it comes overhead, just like
exactly.
get cut out. Yeah,
exactly. All right, well, let's bring Karan onto the show. CEO of K2 Space. They just raised $500 million. So very exciting, $6.8 billion valuation. Starship is a big piece of their business model. All right, I'd say in the outer years, but I mean, certainly interested in hearing his thoughts on the heat shield piece and what's going on. Karan, great to see you.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
We were just debating the Starship heat shield issue, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's first talk about the fact that you just raised $500 million, $6.8 billion valuation. How do you feel? You're building this company with your brother. How does that feel? Like, what's the family celebration look like? Give it to us.
Yeah, so it's been great. You know, my brother and I started this company 4 years ago, June 2022. So it's been a crazy ride, right? And you guys have been along for a bit of it, but we were pretty excited last week to announce our next round, our Series D, a $500 million round at a $6.8 billion valuation, which is a big number, but I think just like the next step in our company's like growth and development. So we're feeling pretty good right now.
Well, congrats on that raise, and I think it's the valuation has effectively doubled since the last raise. What are investors looking at or what are you communicating to investors to help justify that $7 billion valuation, which makes you one of the kind of most valuable space businesses, both public and private, today?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Like this round was purely on multiples of next 12-month revenue, right? As the last round as well. And so revenue is ticking up. We've signed over $1 billion in contracts. So there's a real business that's spinning up here that doesn't look like a 4-year-old company. It looks like someone that's much older, much more sophisticated. I think that's what got investors excited. In terms of what's happened since the Series C, which was like 8 months ago, there's really like a few key things. One is we had the first successful mission, which is Gravitas. It was the first flight of the 20 kilowatt satellite, which is about as powerful as the highest power platform that's ever flown. And then 2 is just like massive commercial traction, right? We announced one of the largest commercial satellite deals, a deal with SES for 30 satellites in 2028. We announced a Golden Dome win partnering with Anduril on space-based interceptors. We announced a missile warning, missile tracking contract at MEO. And we announced our first program of record, which is a military satellite called PTSG in GEO. And so a bunch of these wins over the last 6 months really kind of changed from the investor perspective the relative value of this company, especially when you look at the underlying revenue growth.
What are over the next year, like what are some key milestones that you hope to prove?
Yeah, at this point, it's all about scaling, right? We proved that we could tackle this super hard engineering problem once, right? We had to go build giant reaction wheels, giant solar arrays. I mean, 85% of the satellite was built in-house because the subsystems didn't exist, right? A lot of technical risk there that we brought down with this first satellite, right? And now we've really have to prove that we can do it many times, right? And so it's all about scaling. It's about scaling up mass production and the factory behind me. We need to go basically have 4 satellites coming together over the next 4 months in preparation for our Q2 27 launch, which is called Trinity. At the same time, we need to continue to scale as we think about hitting some of those large contracts like the SES deal that we have to deliver in 2028. And then finally, we have to think about scaling up the satellite itself. We now have customers that are coming to us and asking us, well, it's great that you launched this platform that has the most power in the industry, but we actually want to see if you can give us more, right? There's almost an insatiable demand for power, and I'm happy to talk a bit more about that as well.
So can you give us a idea, maybe in terms of footprint of the factory? What does a 20 kilowatt satellite look like, and how big are those arrays, and how hard it is to build that versus the 100 kilowatt that you're looking to build with the Mega?
Yeah, so think like almost 50-meter wingspan, right? So it's from tip to tip of the 20 kilowatt satellite, and that pushes up to over 80 or 90 as you get up to the 100 kilowatt class satellite. So pretty massive, right? And we're not talking about just doing one or two of them, right? Like this factory behind me, it's a 185,000 square foot factory. It's sized to do at peak capacity about 120 kilowatt satellites per year, right? And so it's not just one or two massive satellites, it is many. And eventually we're gonna need to think about how to scale it even more than the 100, and then eventually how do you scale the 100 kilowatt satellite even more, right? So it's all stepwise, right? We need a lot of space, but we figured out how to be kind of relatively efficient for the amount of space that you need. We are going to be continuing to grow our footprint as we scale up, but there's a lot of space that's required when you're mass producing giant satellites.
Yeah, I love the name Trinity, by the way. Very biblical and very dramatic. So I do want to talk about your.
We try, right? Gravitas Trinity. Yeah,
exactly. So I do want to talk about this kind of thesis you've had, which for a while was fairly contrarian, that you and your brother had. So the industry spent really the last decade saying small satellites was the future. Satellites should get smaller. You built K2 on the exact opposite. You and Neil built K2 on the exact opposite thesis. Like, what did you see at the time that others didn't?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. It was a physics-based approach, right? Almost every application in space ties back to power. For satellites, because all power is generated by your solar arrays, size and power scale almost one-to-one. And we were looking at this and we were saying, like, all these companies have gone and tried to figure out how to do it cheaper and faster by going smaller. But by going smaller, they sacrificed all power. It was this terrible choice, right? And for the industry, it felt like it was the only choice, right, that was out there. And so what we wanted to do was figure out, like, could we solve the really hard engineering challenges that would then allow us to be kind of one of the first to both increase power, but also increase manufacturability, go at a lower cost, industrialize it. And for the long run, that's like exactly what's necessary. Like, you have to figure out how to do a lot of power at scale if we ever truly want to go do all the cool sci-fi stuff that we want to go do in space.
What are some of those cool sci-fi ideas besides SATCOM?
So the stuff. So what I say is, like, practical steps to sci-fi future, right? Like, Neil and I, we're unfortunately, like, neither of us have the money to just fund a space operation standalone, and so we need to build a real business, right? So the first few steps are the things that make money today and need a lot of power. It's communications, right? The next is the thing that's going to make money tomorrow requires a lot of power. That's compute. Yep. And I think communications and compute are going to be such foundational capabilities for every single company, every single country, every organization, that they're all going to be looking for ways to deploy their capability in space. You layer on top of that a bunch of really interesting national security missions, and you've got a really interesting business that provides the foundation for us to then go do the wacky, right? Yep. And the wacky to me is like, all right, as we're pushing up power, as we're pushing up scale, as we're pushing up the ability to put these platforms anywhere, we're really planning to roll out the infrastructure layer that eventually, as humanity starts to expand across the solar system, is building off of, right? I don't even know all the applications, whether it's mining, whether it's energy production, whether it's something else, but I know it's going to need a lot of mass, it's going to need a lot of power, and it's going to need the ability to do that in an industrial, mass-producible way. And that's our whole play. We're going to be in the middle of all of that.
Do you think the small sat revolution has reached its limits?
I think everyone's slowly moving larger, right? Like, I think when we started this company, people were like, the two big things we had pushbacks on us, and like the reasons why some investors passed on our seed was like, oh, that's really hard. No one's going to be able to do it. The only way you can go cheaper or faster is with small satellites. And then the second was, no one's ever going to need that much power. I think both of those groups in the last 12 months have been proven to be completely wrong, right? And I think like everyone's moving larger. Everyone's seeing the need for more power. We just chose to skip ahead to what's optimal 10 years from now because we know that that's really hard and we want to be the best at that. So we've kind of created this new category that only we can operate in right now. I'm sure people will catch up at some point, but it's up to us to continue to kind of out-execute the rest of the market.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's not just space. It's every industry on Earth, too, is now hyper-focused on power. and a ton of power. And that wasn't much of a conversation 5-6 years ago. But can you talk about, you obviously have now 4 years of standing up a facility under your belt. Can you talk about maybe first mover advantage and how important it is to be ahead of an idea in space rather than following an idea?
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of been building the entire company, not even for the 20 kilowatt satellite that we just launched, but for the 100 kilowatt class that we want to launch in the future, right? Like every step of this journey has been in pursuit of that. And it's required massive degrees of vertical integration, right? We had to go basically build the entire satellite from scratch, all the way down to the reaction wheels, the batteries, the flight computer, the avionics stack. It's full stack vertical integration, right? That's required. And that takes a lot of engineering. It takes capital to put towards like completely new R&D efforts as you go after every one of these hard problems. One of the examples I like to share is we just launched a satellite with the highest power electric propulsion system that's ever flown. It's a 20 kilowatt system. It's 4 times more powerful than anything else that's ever flown. It's going to be what allows us to put this platform in any orbit and eventually all over the solar system. What we were doing there wasn't new physics, but it was super hard engineering that only a few people in the world can do. And we proved it out. That thruster fired on the first try. We got some cool videos online of it firing in space with the Earth behind it. That's the kind of technical moat that we have. And we're not going to get comfortable just with that, right? We've become the best at solving really hard engineering problems. Our whole objective now is to keep stacking advantages, keep stacking the ability to do stuff that nobody else can. And that's going to be why we win as we go into the 2030s, which I think is going to be awesome.
How is the Department of War thinking about larger satellites?
Yeah, I think for the most part, every single person that we've talked to has said, I understand, for my mission area, how it benefits from either more power, more payload mass, or the ability to deploy in any orbit, right? The whole idea of like, multi-orbit strategy as it relates to architectures is becoming more and more mainstream and kind of like the common normal thought. And so I think most of the customers that we're talking to are incredibly excited for their mission area, what this does for the payload we put on Starship or New Glenn, and we'll see in the 2030s what other new launch vehicles with the 8-meter fairing class come up. But that was the idea. And, we're incredibly excited about SpaceX. We're very close to the team. They've been great partners and great launch partners. But should they ever decide that, we're going to shut off commercial launch and we're only going to launch our own hardware, like we're prepared. Like we kind of have taken the steps necessary to make sure that we have option value. Personally, I don't think that will be the case, but let's see. As the founder of a company, like I need to think about all the scenarios and plan for the downside scenario, and we plan for it, right? I do think like launch capacity is going to be a really interesting question that everyone's kind of going to deal with over the next few years. The final point is like our customers are the U.S. government and some large commercial operators. A lot of them have already taken care of that launch problem themselves or de-risked it or pre-purchased through 2035. And so I look at it more as like a long-term, like let's see how things evolve on a 5 to 10 year time horizon and less of a short-term kind of capacity constraint, at least for us specifically.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. We were just talking to Evan about this at True Anomaly, and he like the reality is if you are serving the government customer, you don't have to worry about launch nearly as much, right? So it's almost like strategically, it feels like if you're running a business, a space business right now, and you're selling to the government, it's like where you should be. Quite frankly, that's where your focus should be, at least for the next few years, until this like launch issue kind of resolves itself a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's either, for us, we've always looked at a diversified set of businesses sitting on top of this platform as being a good thing regardless, right? Just from like a macro cycles perspective. But yeah, the government generally has the launch problem, in their equation that they're solving on a regular basis. And then some of the larger commercials also are being very strategic and thinking about the option set and thinking about how to diversify. And so it all comes down to like who you're dealing with and who you're working with.
Have you spent any time on the Starship heat shield debate, or like have looked into that a little bit?
I have not. For me, I'm like, SpaceX is incredibly talented, incredibly good at what they do. Like if there are challenges, they will solve them. Those who bet against Elon do so at their own risk, right? And so like to me, I'm like, there's even more challenges that we're not even hearing about behind the scenes that are going to make Starship really difficult. And I'm also pretty sure they're going to solve those challenges. So I don't spend too much time.
Yeah, and obviously your first idea or deck on this was all built around Starship. Do you still think that, like, if you were to bet here, obviously you don't know for sure, but do you think that they will eventually open up Starship for commercial launches?
So it's pretty funny. When we celebrated our 4-year anniversary, we had an all hands, and I walked through with the entire company our pre-seed pitch deck, which had some really bad clip art satellites in it, but it also had some things that were really right. Like, we thought the future was bigger, the future was higher power. It had some things that were totally wrong. Like, our next steps page had us using Starship on a quarterly basis in 2025, right? Totally wrong there, right? So I'm still like mega long Starship. Our entire business today, all the economics, all the revenue is tied to the 5-meter fairing class, which is Falcon 9, Vulcan, Terran R, and a bunch of them. And so from a business perspective, the way I look at it is we've built an amazing business with the existing launch vehicle. I've got a stack of hardware that's designed to go both scale from the 20 kilowatt to the 100 kilowatt. And I'll be a first mover when those launch vehicles are available, whether it's New Glenn and whether it's Starship. We've built this company to go be the best at the higher power class, larger satellite size, and we're ready to scale when the launch vehicles are ready.
Do you have a view on all of the satellite manufacturing businesses that are building smaller scale satellites? There's many of them that are out there. Many of them are at fractions of at a fraction of the valuation that you sit in today. Like, do you think those companies are in trouble? Are they going to have to pivot? Is that just becoming a race to the bottom in terms of like pricing and commoditization? Are those companies going to go into like payload businesses? I mean, we're already starting to see that, but I'm just kind of curious, like, what is your perspective on all of the smaller satellite manufacturing businesses? I shouldn't say smaller in size, but just, in terms of the actual buses that they're building.
Yeah. I think there will always be mission areas that maybe do need smaller satellites and are totally fine, right? I think like the architecture that Planet has rolled out, it works. Like, does Planet need a bunch of gigas for that, what they're doing? Probably not, right? So I think there will always be applications in space that will need smaller satellites. For the ones that need a lot of power or need a lot of payload mass, it will always be the case that it'll be a platform like ours that is a much better fit. And I think like the markets are going to move and shift to demand, right? A lot of the money that's made today is made in communications. Communications happens to tie directly to power, right? And so I think you'll see anyone that's trying to go after comms in space moving larger, as you've seen even with Starlink, right? Each generation of Starlink has gotten larger and higher power. So do I see this shift away from that? Yeah. Am I trying to stay as far away from like the commodity bus small sat market as possible? Also yes, right? Like I think there's enough people going after it. Let them go after it. Let them fight. It might be a little bit of a race to the bottom. We're going to stay doing what we do, which is taking on the really hard engineering challenges and try to be the best at that.
Yeah, I wrote an article recently that was titled "There are too many satellite manufacturers," and part of that was almost every, and I shouldn't say every, but most new satellite companies want to in-house their own satellite manufacturing. You do have a strong demand from the government, but it's not infinite. And frankly, the primes still play a big role in this market, that being Lockheed and Northrop. So how do you navigate that dynamic, the commercial versus kind of a limited supply of government contracts?
Yeah, I think it's always been the case. Like, if you're going outside of the government, there is some dilemma between certain applications and certain operators. It just makes sense for them to vertically integrate, right? You're seeing that not necessarily on the comm side, but you are seeing that in some of the other in-space applications, right? And so I think like for us, like what we want to do is, can we find the few really big customers where there's just a very clear fit between what they need and what we offer? And that's all on the commercial side. The government side, obviously, the government's not going to go vertically integrate their own satellites, right? They're going to build programs off of players like us and Northrop and Lockheed and all them. And with those players, we partner, right? We partner with a lot of the big primes out there, and more of those partnerships will be announced over the next few years. And then there's also certain mission areas we'll go it on our own, right? And figure out what the best path forward makes sense. That's kind of the play. It's like do what's optimal across those different customer segments.
So I just want to ask about Neil for a second. So he's the technical one. Some might argue the smart one. I'm kidding.
I call him version 2.0.
No, but in all seriousness, I am curious, like, now I know you guys have your lanes and you've done a really good job sort of like building the business, in your lanes, but I'm curious, like, what do you guys disagree on? Like, what are some things that, like, within sort of the building of this business where you're like, you guys don't see eye to eye? I mean, the brother dynamic is super interesting, right? You don't see that often. So I just wanted to kind of get into your head a little bit about that.
Yeah, he's deeply technical. I'm pretty commercial, and so we're highly complementary. It's worked out pretty well. Like, we've been able to like debate things and move fast. And the best part about it is, if like someone disagrees, there's no agenda behind it, right? Family always comes first. And so I think that's what's allowed us to move really fast. There isn't much that we disagree on. There is stuff that we debate, right? All the time on a daily basis. Like just before this, I was debating how we communicate something to some customer with Neil, and we were working through it. But usually like the 10 minutes of like, about minute 7, minute 8, starting to get annoyed with each other usually results in a pretty good outcome. So I'd say like, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun building with your sibling. It's actually, I think, our superpower is we're just like able to move and make decisions really fast. They're usually really good decisions informed by what both Neil and I are best at. And I think it's helped us get K2 to where it is today.
When are you going public?
It's funny. Like, people look at our revenue numbers and they're like, "Oh yeah, these are public company numbers." And I'm like, you know what? Like, that's great. I appreciate that. We're a 4-year-old company.
Yeah.
We're very early in our journey. So I think like, we have a lot of work to do, right? Like we're just starting to figure out what this thing can be, right? And I think it's worth spending the time as a private company, making long-term optimal decisions, not worrying about quarterly numbers, and really thinking about how we build this into the thing that we really think it can be, right? And so, yeah, we're a long way off. A lot of work to go do. There's a lot of positive stuff that's happening right now. We just need to continue to execute.
Amazing. Well, Karan, thanks so much for being with us. Pleasure to have you, and congrats again on the round.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
A lot of capital between those 3 companies.
I know, a lot of capital, but the most
1.3
capital
billion,
would be at the New York Stock Exchange. We have all the capital is behind us.
All the capital
actually.
is behind us. It is in all these little computers.
So
you are maybe just to kind of wrap with this, like you're going to we're going to give everyone a little preview right now. So you're about to publish a pretty interesting piece on AST Space Mobile, publicly traded company, and ULA. So I mean, tell us about your bold thought there.
Yeah, this is a fun piece that I'm writing. But basically, last month AST went to market with a $1 billion convertible note offering, and one of the uses of proceeds, for the first time they put this in there, the company cited was quote unquote partnerships and or acquisitions to further vertically integrate its business and mitigate risks associated with third-party launch providers.
Yep.
So that begs the question, if you are looking to partner or acquire a launch provider, there really aren't that many. Meanwhile, also the company doesn't have that much revenue, but they have raised an enormous amount of cash. It's like $4 billion of cash, potentially in preparation for something. So, there's a lot of reasons why they would look to partner with a launch company. We talked to basically all 3 of our guests about this, but there is an acute launch shortage in the industry. Falcon 9 or SpaceX appears to be slowing down Falcon 9 sales in preparation for moving over to Starship. New Glenn, which was supposed to be AST's kind of workhorse rocket, blew up on the pad, which set them back, 9 months to a year.
Yep.
And by the way, they also, when they do come back, which they will, and they'll come back better than ever, New Glenn has to focus on Pentagon launches. Importantly, the NASA HLS launches. Amazon Leo is a big one, their own internal constellation. So AST could be kind of 5th or 6th in the pecking order with New Glenn. And then besides those 2 rockets, you don't have many other options. So you have a $25 billion market cap company with AST. For those who don't know at home, AST is a direct-to-sell connectivity business that competes almost directly with Starlink. And they're direct to sell. It's a massive market that they're looking to tap into. But it's a big business. AST is a big business. They're doing well at pumping out these satellites, but they have no way of getting these satellites to orbit. So what do you do if you are them?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not saying you're wrong about the thesis. What I will say is I don't love the sort of scenario. I don't think that AST is, running the operations of a launch company is very complicated. It is quite different than like building a satellite. Yes, there's obviously some level of like learning that can intertwine between the two. So I just think it's going to be a really difficult challenge for AST to like basically operate ULA specifically also because it has not gone quite well. Vulcan is, it's had a very shaky first few years of operation. And I think just most recently, I think last month, Lockheed announced that ULA had to raise an additional $500 million to shore up its finances. It's clearly not a super efficient, well-run organization, I should say, compared to some of the other launch providers. It's been on sale for a long time.
Yeah.
There is a reason why it hasn't been acquired yet. And I don't think it's just price. I think there's like a lot more to it, which is like, hey, like, what do we need to do to actually make this a more efficient business? So yeah, I think it's going to be. I think the idea of AST buying a launch company isn't in of itself a big challenge. And then when you talk about acquiring a launch company that will require a substantial amount of like a facelift on the operational side, I just think it's a very challenging endeavor. But having said that, it's probably when I think about the capable launch companies out there that have either made it to orbit or looking like that, Relativity, Stoke, Firefly, Rocket Lab, those are, Rocket Lab's out of the question. Even those other few companies, like, I don't think they could probably afford to buy those businesses. Yeah. They could theoretically, but I don't think like I just don't see that as a real scenario. So maybe as a result of sort of the operational headache, maybe there's a deal to structure there that actually makes sense.
Yeah, there are people don't want expendable rockets. That's why Rocket Lab has taken a look at this, Blue Origin has taken a look at this, and it is a culture change to go expendable versus reusable. AST is a very unique company, and it's almost like a binary. It's not like a Rocket Lab where they're just continuing to be methodical about building the business. It is almost a binary business. It's a $25 billion market cap company. They need their satellites in orbit as soon as possible so that they don't get kind of blown away by Starlink taking market share. And we always talk about the holy grail of being a space business, and maybe the only way to build a very special, huge space business is to be vertically integrated with a launch vehicle. We saw Baiju with the Cowboy.
Yep.
Right? He has his orbital data center business that raised, I think, $250 million, and he's also building a rocket because of how important rockets are to the story. I'll also say, I'm a fan of reusability, obviously, and I hate expendable rockets. But the notion that ULA is a maybe poorly run business, I think is not necessarily totally accurate. They have this Atlas V rocket that has launched 100 times, and there's been 0 failures with it. So they have historically a pretty decent track record. Obviously, when it's expendable, you're not going to be able to get the type of margins you want. So maybe there's an argument to say, hey, Vulcan has gone through a number of issues. They've, Lockheed and Boeing have put in more money into this, and you're buying at the bottom before it just starts ramping. So interesting kind of thought exercise that I'm typing out. That's going to be a fun read for tomorrow.
What probability do you put on this?
I think this is just. I wouldn't say it's more probable than not. This is more of like there's a window of a interesting use case here. where, by the way, ULA has $10 billion of backlog from high margin NSL backlog, and it could be a decent business tucked in, not just as a way to get ASTs satellites to orbit. But I do think, given this kind of acute launch shortage, Vulcan could be an important player here before these reusable rockets really start coming online. And who is going to be the new steward? You need someone with a decent amount of cash to pay for it, a decent market cap to pay for it, and there's only a few names out there that meet that profile.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Fair enough. I guess we'll see. It'll be interesting. Appreciate the preview.
Yeah.
So SpaceX earnings are tonight. Do you have a prediction as to like where the stock is trading tomorrow? Up, down, flat?
I'll go up. Let's go up.
Okay.
We're going up.
We're going up.
We're going up.
All right. I'm gonna say flat, just
Okay.
because like I don't think there's anything. The beauty of a company of SpaceX is you're building in public, right?
Yeah.
Everything that's out there is out there. Absent them saying like, hey, you know, obviously like there's contracts they can certainly announce, and there's Starlink numbers they can certainly announce that can move the stock to the upside. But I think for the most part, I think a win would just be like a good sort of like flat outcome heading into this this lockup expiry. Like I think minimal volatility heading into this lockup expiry, I think will be a good thing. So
Yeah, I think that's
we'll
right.
see.
I think it's like you're going to be looking at these capex numbers, the guidance on that. Are they going to need to take out, raise more capital, dilute shareholders, raise debt? That's going to be the big question.
Yeah.
And then we already talked about the lockup period. I also think there is no formula to how these stocks are moving and how the SpaceX stock will move. So even if there is selling pressures, that doesn't mean it's going to go down because there's a bigger float.
Yeah.
There's a lot of liquidity in here that we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well that's our show. August 4th, Tuesday. It's 12:37 p.m. We'll be back here in just like 2 weeks. August 25th is our next show. This is our first time doing 2 shows in 1 month. We're just steadily increasing the cadence. Maybe at some point we'll be a daily show. We'll see. But until then, thank you guys for listening, and please be sure to read our amazing content. I mean, Jack produces awesome research, Payload Pro, and then we have our Payload newsletter, payloadspace.com, and then our defense newsletter, that's tectonicdefense.com, and of course our biotech news publication, that's decodingbio.com. So we will see you guys in a couple weeks.